So I think it's an interesting, challenging space, and I think we're going to see, because of it, more and more movement in these areas. And so there were a couple of acquisitions in this space that I know this is your area. So maybe you want to walk us through these acquisitions and what you think they mean.
Yeah, one of the most interesting ones I saw this week was around AppDirect announcing the acquisition of a company called vCom Solutions, a leading company in the telecom and managed mobility space. And to provide some context, I saw an interesting quote from a Constellation Research event. Guy named Ashwin Rangan, who you are very familiar with, who you've interviewed in the past, Charlie. He stated that at the Constellation's recent annual event, I think the CIO role is becoming the chief cat herder role. The CIO is turning into a chief procurement officer for technology versus the joy of innovation. The innovation track is being disrupted by trying to figure out how to buy all of this stuff. So, in response, there are marketplaces that are showing up that seek to simplify the purchase of IT. AppDirect is one of these big ones. They've got 1,000 employees. They manage billions and billions in spend across cloud and SaaS. And what they've brought in vCom to do in this acquisition is to also further help with network, telecom, and mobility spend, where that's $1 trillion global market. It's commoditized to some extent. It's not growing as fast as the rest of IT, but it's still this gigantic quarter of the IT budget overall. So now you have this, call it 150 person team who can help specifically with those network and mobility challenges, as well as provide advisors to help with that purchasing. Because at the end of the day, frankly, CIOs don't really care about negotiating with the likes of Verizon and AT&T and Vodafone on top of the gazillion other headaches that exist around AI and low code apps and all of these other things that are frankly more interesting to the company as a whole.
Well, and I'd argue that the average CIO doesn't want to be spending the time negotiating any of this. I mean, I think there are definitely some that have sort of like made their name by, beating up vendors and getting the cost down. But at the end of the day, your mandate should be to drive value for the organization, and an incremental cost savings, is just that, an incremental cost savings. It's not really how you're generating this sort of exponential value. But one of the things, I mean, and Ash is a great guy, and he's always been this very sort of innovation oriented
Mhm.
mindset. And I think he's been very successful as the CIO because of that. And I think it's also pointing out, I mean, I think this is our trend, or our theme for this episode, is the balancing act, right? Because
Mhm.
this is also pointing to another balancing act. So one of the other things in the Flexera report, one of the other major findings or issues, was that CIOs and IT organizations continue to struggle with innovation, of actually you continuing to push that. And I think this is why, right? We get so much of our time and energy is sucked into these operational things, managing the stack itself, managing the spend, dealing with all of these elements. And it makes it really, really hard if that's what you're spending all of your time doing, that you then have no resources to actually go out and do the things that are leveraging that technology to drive value for the organization. And I think this has been the challenge within IT for generations now. And so
Mhm.
it's going to be a continuing battle. And one of the reasons, we've talked about this before, I'm big on FinOps, particularly if you break it out of the cloud world and say, we're going to use this discipline for everything, because it gives you a way to manage and control, and to do that in the context of what your innovation agenda is.
Right. But there's always been this challenge of figuring out what is that value at the end of the day. And it's not necessarily uh, anybody's fault per se, other than that IT has been treated more as a commodity than as a value driver, despite all the hype. Everybody talks about how technology provides value, but then at the end of the day, when you ask the CIO, how does this align to our cost of goods sold and our revenue and our profit, you get a lot of blank stares.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, here's what I think is great though. If you are a CIO or an IT leadership, if you can get yourself centered on that, then suddenly it starts illuminating pathways for you. And